When it comes to fat loss, there's nothing more important than your macronutrient intake. This doesn't mean food quality doesn't matter, but it pales in comparison to the macro breakdown of that food. So in this video, I show you how to calculate your macros for weight loss so you can finally get the body you're after.
Hey, this is Colin DeWay. If you want to master your metabolism and create forever results, start now by subscribing and click on that bell notification so you don't miss anything. Alright, there's a lot of things to consider when you're setting up macros for weight loss, so make sure you stick around to the end of the video to make sure you get all the information you need to set yourself up for success. Now, it seems like the first thing most people do when they're looking to set up macros is they go online and they go to either like a TDEE calculator or a macro calculator or some kind of calculator online, and I have to be honest, I really don't recommend doing this. Not only do these calculators typically tend to be high, but they're also just math equations. They don't take into account your genetics, your dieting history, and all the different things that factor into how many calories you need. You can easily take two people with the exact same stats, height, weight, age, gender, all that type of stuff, and one might be able to lose on 2,000 calories, the other one might need to get down to 1,300 calories. And this is why we can't just throw around X numbers and we can't just say that so many calories is too low for everybody because everyone's unique. Low calories are relative to the individual, and one person might actually feel like they're starving on 1,500 calories and the other person might be full on 1,500 calories. So what I like to do, if you don't already know what your maintenance calories are, is do sort of a food recall and just take the next at least few days, preferably up to a week, and just eat exactly the way you've been eating. Don't change anything, but just track it. This way, not only do you get a better understanding of what your diet actually looks like, but you can take that week's calories and just find the average. And if you're maintaining during that time, now you know roughly your maintenance calories. If you're gaining weight, then you know your maintenance is a little below that. And if you're already losing weight, well, then you're already going to know roughly what it takes to lose weight, and you just have to set up macros from there. Anyway, once you do have your maintenance calories, now you can make some educated guesses as what you need to do to get the weight loss going. And what I typically recommend is to make at least a minimum of a 300 calorie drop from there, but for most people I find between about 400 and 600 is a good sweet spot to get started. Plus, we need to structure our macros, which I'll get to in a minute. Keep in mind, you want to make an aggressive enough drop in calories to start to make sure you elicit a response, but not so big of a drop that you have no room to make adjustments down the road. Remember, your metabolism is adaptive, so the bigger changes you make in the beginning, while you'll probably lose more weight right away, you'll end up losing less weight total because your body will adapt and you'll have no room to make adjustments and keep the process going. Not to mention, the faster you lose weight, the more likely you are to lose muscle, and the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism will be. Plus, the faster you lose weight, typically the more likely there is for weight regain later. Just keep in mind that everyone is different and some people have more or less adaptive metabolisms, so some people can get away with smaller adjustments and other people need to get much more aggressive. But the biggest thing is, no matter what, you just have to see how your body responds and adjust accordingly. So if you make an initial drop in calories and you're not seeing any weight loss, then you want to drop a little bit more until you see things get going again. So I typically recommend continuing to drop about 100 to 200 calories until you reach that threshold. Anyway, when it comes to setting up your macro split, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. For one, we get our calories from our macros, which is short for macronutrients, and 1 gram of protein has 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs has 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. So once you know how many calories you're going to eat, the first thing you do is set up your protein, because protein is by far the most important macronutrient. This is not only because protein is responsible for building and maintaining muscle mass, but it's also the most satiating macronutrient, so when calories get lower, it's going to help you feel full. And even better than that is the high thermic effect of food that protein has. The thermic effect of food is basically how many calories your body burns just processing the food that you eat. Fat comes in with the lowest thermic effect of food at about 2 to 3%, whereas carbs come in at about 5 to 8%, and protein has a whopping 25 to 30% thermic effect of food. So this is what people mean when they say not all calories are created equal. Technically, all calories are equal going into your mouth. It's just what happens when it gets into your body, and that changes things. So for an example, let's just say you had 1,000 calories worth of protein. Well, you would actually net about 750 to 800 calories from that 1,000 calories. Whereas if you had 1,000 calories worth of fat, you would net about 970 to 980 calories, so you'd basically get all the calories you eat from fat. Plus, keep in mind, like I said, the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism will be, the more calories your body will burn at rest. And since protein is what builds muscle, you can see how a high protein diet can have a lot of positive benefits. So with that being said, I recommend recommend eating about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight and set that as your protein goal. Now, if you're obese and have a lot of weight to lose, that might be kind of difficult to do, and in that case you can do 1 gram per pound of whatever your kind of goal weight is, or maybe lean body mass, but I would try to get more if you can, and maybe even go up to 1.2 grams per pound. Once you have your protein goal set, now we want to set up our fat intake. We need to make sure we keep a minimum amount of fat because unlike carbs, fat is essential for our survival, and it plays critical roles in things like hormones and digestion. I personally recommend that you take between about 20 to 30% of your intake and give it to fat. If you prefer fat over carbs, then keep it on the higher end of that spectrum, and if you prefer carbs over fat, then keep it on the lower end of the spectrum. And I also recommend for most men to not go below about 40 to 50 grams per day, and for women about 30 to 40 grams per day, except for in some rare instances. So as an example, if you're eating about 2,000 calories per day and you had 25% of your calories come from fat, that would be 500 calories, which would be roughly 55 grams of fat. And just remember that fat has 9 calories per gram, which is over double protein and carbs, so fat calories can add up really fast. Now, once you have your protein and your fat set, your carb consumption is really simple. It's however many calories are left goes towards carbs. Now, please don't take this as I don't think carbs are important. They absolutely are, especially when it comes to things like energy and performance. It's just that carbs are typically the most variable macronutrient when it comes to dieting. I think it's worth mentioning as well, there is actually technically a fourth macronutrient, which is alcohol, which has 7 calories per gram. And while we certainly don't want to make a large part of our diet alcohol, we can have it in moderation and it won't hamper fat loss results. But rather than tracking alcohol separately, I just typically recommend that you take the alcohol calories and count it as either fat or carbs or a combination of the two. So for instance, if you had 100 calories worth of alcohol, you could count that as 25 grams of carbs, 11 grams of fat, or even a mixture of the two, like 7 grams of carbs and 8 grams of fat. All these examples will still basically be 100 calories, it's just how you want to divvy it up. I definitely don't recommend though that you take away calories from protein for alcohol. Now don't go anywhere, because even though you have your macro split, now there's still some really important things you need to consider to set yourself up for weight loss success. For one, I highly recommend that you set up your macros in a way to take averages for the week rather than trying to look at just daily numbers. I promise, if you try to live and die every single day on hitting your numbers, you're gonna die. It's just not gonna work. So what I typically recommend is try to set up some kind of range of macros and take the average for the week and make that your goal. Not only does this make it more realistic, but it also makes your diet and your life more flexible. Of course, it always depends on each person and their goals and preferences and things like that, but I typically recommend for a good starting point for most people is to try to stay within 5 to 10 grams of each macro and 30 to 50 calories on average for the week. So say for instance you go over a couple hundred calories one day, well you can just easily make that up either like the next day or taking away a little bit from the next few days and just make sure your average for the week works out. Just keep in mind the lower your calories get, the more you're going to want to tighten up that range, and the higher your calories are, the more flexible you can be, even to the point of just having like maybe a calorie target and a protein target and interchange your carbs and fats however you want, because if your calories are nice and high, then you always have a sufficient amount of carbs and fats anyways, and research has been pretty clear that as long as calories and protein are equated, fat loss pretty much remains the same. So not only does this process take away some of the all or nothing mentality, but it allows you to be more flexible not only with how you track your food, but the flexibility that you have within food choices as well. Because let's be honest, how long are you really going to stick to a diet that eliminates all your favorite foods? This is always the big argument that clean eaters have against flexible dieting, that it's just an excuse to eat junk, but that's just not the case. I definitely recommend that you eat the majority of your diet from nutrient-dense whole foods, but that doesn't mean just because you have a little something you like ice cream, that your efforts are completely sabotaged. And even then, even if you do only eat clean, you still are better off knowing what your macros are and tracking them, because this way when you hit plateaus you can make adjustments because you know how much you're eating. In fact, I've worked with clients that do several different eating strategies, from flexible dieting to vegan to paleo to keto, but there's one thing that remains all the same: they all track their macros. Tracking macros accurately and consistency is the surefire way to know how much you're eating and take the guesswork out of it. If you're just eliminating certain types of foods or just trying to eat clean, what are you going to do when fat loss stalls? And that is when, not if. You have no idea how much you're eating, and it makes it really difficult to know what you should do from there. Anyway, another thing to consider here is, much like I like an average for your actual intake, I also recommend taking an average of your weight. Weight can fluctuate on a daily basis up to several pounds, but almost none of those fluctuations have anything to do with body fat, and body fat is the thing we actually care about here. Daily weight fluctuations are all things like hormones, stress, sleep, training inflammation, sodium intake, how much food is still digesting in your system, how many fluids you drank, on and on and on. So if you weigh yourself daily and take an average for the week and count that as your actual weight, it takes away those fluctuations. Plus it takes away the possibility of a once per week weigh-in where you weigh in one day and you might be abnormally low, and then the next week you might be abnormally high, and it makes it look like you gained weight when you actually didn't. Your average might have actually been down, and this is definitely something that can happen. Just make sure you weigh yourself first thing in the morning, after going to the bathroom, before eating or drinking anything, and always in the same clothes or nude, because this is going to be the time of the day where things are most consistent. This process not only gives you a clearer picture of what's happening, but also for most people it actually helps create a better relationship with the scale, because the less frequently you weigh yourself, the more pressure you put on every time you step on that scale. But even with that said, we still want to look at other things besides weight. We want to look at things like pictures and measurements and how your clothes are fitting, because sometimes, let's just be honest, that scale can be a big fat liar, and it's just data, all right? It's just one tool in the tool belt, not the be all end all. So we want to look at any form of progress. Okay, there's two other really important things you want to consider here. One is taking strategies like refeeds and diet breaks and how to set those up. And the other is how to adjust macros throughout your entire cut, because like I said, our metabolisms are too adaptive to be able to do the same thing forever, so we need to learn how to make adjustments to continue to see progress. So if you want to know how to adjust your macros when cutting, make sure you check out this video up here, or if you want to learn more about refeeds, diet breaks, and carb cycling and strategies like that to see better fat loss, then make sure you check out this video down here and set yourself up for success. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the comments below, and I promise I'll get back to you. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you over at one of those other videos.